morning. If you're listening to this right out of the gate, it's probably Monday, April 13th. We get the AGI Weekly Blitz where we run down everything that's been going on in AI. I am fortunate enough to have Citizen AI's Chief Operating Officer, Oliver Belanger, with me today. Belanger. I've been saying your name wrong forever, man. Oliver, for those who didn't see you last time you were on, introduce yourself a little bit.
Hey, thanks, Jason. Hey, everybody. I'm Oliver Belanger. I'm the COO of Citizen AI. We are a vertical AI tool that helps connect individual people to supportive services. That could be food pantries, that could be some of the large federal programs. It could also be workforce development programs, any of these different kind of community benefits and community resources that those individuals can use to move forward and move closer to their goals in their life.
And you and I have a new podcast, which I'll link in the show notes. Capacity Overload. That's
Mhm.
how frontline workers, direct service providers, and people outside of fundraising in the nonprofit space can leverage technology to do some of the administrative lift so that they can do more of the human work.
Yeah, really excited with that. We've gotten our first guest, Marie, who was fantastic, and we're really hoping to be able to showcase and highlight the real problems that these folks and the real challenges that these folks have, as well as talk through different ways they can use the latest and greatest AI tools, techniques, and understandings in a safe way to solve those and to address those challenges.
And so I'm going to tell a little bit of your story for you, just real quick. Your New York, Brooklyn Bronx, uh, came up through the New York City system and went and got a degree, and then went out to Silicon Valley and got trained. And so I want to use a little bit of more of your intelligence and your pragmatism, and we're going to go a little bit deeper today than we normally do, because there's a lot going on in the scare tactics. And first, I want to frame this with a theory, which I'm more than happy for you to rebut if you disagree with, right? But I think some of this is our own fault. And I'm gonna go back to, and I don't like to get political, but I always end up doing it, and you don't have to at all. But I don't deny that I'm a Republican, right? But what the second Trump run, I watched Ron DeSantis, and I was like, oh, here's someone who's just as conservative, who has pretty much the same values. He doesn't take any crap from Disney or anybody who's trying to be overly woke or whatever term you want to use for that, right? But he acts like a professional. He was a United States Marine. He's a good representation on the global stage of what the United States as a professional stands for. Surely we will pick him. And instead, we wanted the entertainer. You're fired. Everything's on
Well,
fire. Like, that's what we chose as a nation. So I think we gravitate to drama and to being angered, and social media algorithms may have perpetuated that, but it's now the chicken or the egg. Which one causes which to be worse? So when I see Anthropic drop Mythos and not drop Mythos because it's quote unquote the most dangerous model that's ever existed and could like upset all this old code that no one's been able to break for 50 years, and we're now on the Terminator level AI that can only be launched to 50 companies. And I think this is probably marketing as much as it's anything. And people are going, well, why do these AI companies continuously say we're going to end all jobs, we might end existence, we might do this or that, instead of talking like Demis Hassabis does about curing cancer, extending aging? And I say, because the American public resonates with being upset. If we resonated with hope and dreams and the Obama, be the changes you want to see in the world, which isn't Obama, but he has a very similar, like, we need to step up today and create the world that we want. If that's what resonated with us, that's what these marketing companies would be doing to raise money. And so I think it's our own fault that we're hearing all this doomsday crap, because they know that's what will raise money. Now, I will shut up and leave it to you to tell us whether or not Mythos is going to upset every bit of tech, like we just discovered quantum, more or less, and are going to break every encryption, and what you think of this marketing around negativity in AI.
yeah, I mean, I think Um, I think you're spot on. Um, uh, I I don't know if I would agree fully with the framing, and the way that I would look at it is to say that um, we we naturally gravitate towards certain things, right? And you can look at it as Americans are addicted to the drama, um, but you can also look at it as human beings globally, everywhere. Uh, we want to know about the things that are dangerous to us. We naturally gravitate towards things that elicit fear from an attention perspective. They're the things that grab our attention. And so when you look at the incentives of distribution of media, if you look at the incentives of large scale news operations, if you look at the incentives of social media, if you look at all of these different um, organizations and companies and entities that primarily trade and primarily make their money from grabbing your attention from whatever you were doing, right? And basically taking minutes from you and taking minutes of your attention away from other things. And if they're within a format that orients towards like things happening in the world, well, they're going to do what news media outlets have been doing it for 30, 50 years, which is they're going to use fear because that is the natural response to things that we are afraid of is to pay attention to them. Um, and as the media market becomes more competitive from a distribution standpoint, where there's more and more content demanding your attention, does not surprise me that different outlets, whether they be social media or more traditional, are focusing and highlighting fear more and more. So then, if you're a organization, you know, a Anthropic, a OpenAI, or any of these different startups, which need user growth, which need to be known in order to survive because they're not profitable companies, right? So they need to go to their investors and they need to sell something. They need to tell some story that's incredible, amazing, never been seen before. And so what that means they need is as much attention as possible. They've chosen to go down a consumer strategy, at least for name recognition. So they've made the choice that the way they're going to go to market, the way that they're going to be known in the world, is by having consumers, individual people, know that they exist. They could have gone with a different strategy, right? There are plenty of companies out there in the world where consumers have absolutely no idea that they exist, like let's call it a Databricks or a Snowflake, right? No one has any idea. The average consumer has no idea what these companies are. But they're still very successful B2B companies. When you look at Anthropic, OpenAI, and OpenAI probably started this trend, they chose to basically present themselves to their investors and present the way they're going to be valuable by ensuring they had name recognition at the consumer level, which basically starts the cycle of moving towards trying to have consumers know who they are. And so if you're trying, that means you need to get as much earned as opposed to paid attention as possible, which means you need to work through the distribution channels of the US media system. And so if your distribution to the consumer, if they operate on fear, then your best mechanism to get access to that consumer for free or for cheap is to be the scariest thing in the world. Is to be the boogeyman. And so this is where OpenAI, I think, and Anthropic had kind of gone in different directions here a little bit. Anthropic is kind of trying to play both sides by saying we've created the boogeyman, but don't worry, we've also created the door and the shackles to keep the boogeyman enslaved and to have it help us move forward. And we're
So
the good guys. We're the good guys trying to get the large big companies to help us, like, take Prometheus and keep him chained to the rock. So that's kind of the Anthropic's take. OpenAI's take is, more uh someone should really figure this out. Like they seem to not try to take both sides. They're just kind of taking one side, getting the attention, but not positioning themselves with it in the same way. So I think it's no surprise to your point that these companies are are using this mechanism to get attention, because it is what we respond to. I just would um, say that it has more to do with human nature itself and with the incentives of our media distribution channels than something that's unique to or specific to American culture. Um, American culture doesn't counter it necessarily, right? Like to your point, we do love reality TV, we do love entertainment, we do love all of that, right? We react positively to that, but so does everyone else. Um, so that would be kind of the way I think about it.
I like that, and you made me think of two things. One, which is Jensen doesn't talk like that. Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, right? But he doesn't need every consumer, and there's a lot of people who don't know who the hell Nvidia is, right? And yet they're probably one of the most powerful companies in the world, and they're creating all the infrastructure that this stuff exists on. And Jensen is very positive when he talks about AI, but he doesn't need to be in front of every consumer and on every mind. He just needs to build. He's selling the pickaxes and the shovels for the gold rush.
Yeah, and his incentive is right. He just wants to move product. So now all the fear mongering is good for him, right? Um, he doesn't. And if you look at it, he's never countering the fear narrative, right? He's actually more saying that everyone else is creating this fear narrative, and he's saying, "And don't you worry, we've got a shovel for you. We've got a shovel for you." Now, what he does talk about is he does mention like, "Hey, if you've got a 500K, if I had a 500, what he says, right, is if I had a 500K a year engineer, which is the kind of compensation that some of these top end AI engineers, and not like NBA top end engineers, like just like senior, late career quality, but AI native engineers get compensated in cash. That's not like total comp. That's just cash. He says something along the lines of, if they weren't going through like 500K in tokens, I would be very mad at them, right? Which he is making this appeal to this concept of token maxing, which has been getting more popular in Silicon Valley, also in New York, and generally, which is this idea, this very flawed idea that Nvidia loves, that you can measure productivity by measuring the number of tokens that are consumed, which is insane.
We
Um,
saw that before, right, with code at one
yeah.
point in time, and it didn't play out well. Can you kind of give that history
Yeah.
for
So
people who don't
so so
understand
for a
that
long
world?
time, this is back in the IBM mainframe days. Um, in the IBM mainframe days when they were selling mainframes, this is like as Microsoft is kind of picking up, they would sell by the line of code because they were selling these mainframe programs. And so, everyone in software has always wanted to have a like quantitative metric of productivity. So and quantitative metric of value of software that's easy to count. So IBM went in towards line of code maxing as the thing, and this is a really long time ago now. Um, and Microsoft actually, and there's like interviews with Steve Ballmer from the early days, where Microsoft came to the scene and kind of countered this concept. And their whole point was, well, the value of the software, the value is in what it produces and its ease of maintenance. It's not in the number of lines of code. And in fact, more lines of code is actually a sign of poor software design, of harder to maintain code, of a bad product, which is certainly true. As the industry has grown from being very very small to much larger, um, pretty universally at this point, lines of code has been considered a poor metric of measuring productivity of software engineers, productivity productivity or quality of software. In fact, it's almost at this point considered inversely proportional, where there are many sects of many disciplines of the software engineering world that look at as like good code is the fewest lines of code to achieve the goal. Um, so to your point, it's actually very reminiscent to lines of code as a output metric, because effectively what token maxing is very easy to game, and there are many mandates that are being sent out into software companies to mid-level to line and to engineers going, your part of your performance review is what they call AI fluency. I have friends that have this in their companies. But of course, the tricky question of all things is how do you measure? And they get measured on, and of course, and who designs the measurements? So this particular company I'm thinking of has board members that are of the AI model community. And I'm not going to get into any details, but you think one of the large companies that produces models is on the board of this company that's creating this AI fluency. I'm sure that company had input on how they should think about AI fluency. And so the way they're measuring AI fluency, they have like a little like equivalent of a spyware um, that is on their computer that is measuring a whole bunch of different things. Productivity. Now, this is like, this is the software engineer equivalent of a mouse jiggler, or not a mouse jiggler, of like the keyboard tracking and stuff like that for a lot of other employees,
Right.
which the software engineering community is not used to and does not like.
I don't think
I
anybody likes
don't
that.
think I don't think anyone likes that. Yeah, no one likes it, but
Well,
they're not used to it, right?
right.
And what it's measuring is things like what models are you using? How many tokens are you burning? Because again, these are the easy quantitative measures, which of course means that if you're using the highest model that burns the most tokens and just having it spin a lot,
Yeah.
you get performance boost in your performance report as an individual contributor. And so basically what's happening right now is um, many folks in the industry are implementing this philosophy of token maxing, where they measure productivity by the number of tokens you burn, which is of course what Jensen wants, right? What Jensen advertises, what Jensen talks about in everything, because he's selling the pickaxes and shovels. So
But
the
that's
more
completely counterproductive as a business owner. Like, I don't want you using Opus 4.6 to write emails, right? Because
Mhm.
it's costing me $15 per million token
Yeah.
output. You could be using a sonnet or even a haiku
Yep.
to write emails that cost like 50 cents per million
Yep.
output tokens. But I'm incentivizing you to use Opus for every little piddly task that you do so that you can get your performance bonus. Yeah, that
Yep.
seems very counterproductive.
Well, but it's easy to measure, right? And back to human nature, people move towards the path with least resistance. They move towards the thing that other people will approve and agree, um, that they've been told, that is easy to do. And so counting token spend is really easy.
Yeah.
Counting like value created from using an AI tool in comparison to previous methods is really hard. Is really hard. Um, and so, people are adopting the easy measure, just like lines of code a long time ago. And it turns out that measuring the easy thing usually means you're measuring the wrong thing. And of course, if you measure it, like we all know, right? If you measure it, you manage it. And by management usually means make it go up if it's a desirable thing, if it's a max stat, or make it go down if it's a min stat. Um, so across the industry, we're seeing um, some folks are adopting and implementing this stuff incredibly well, but a lot of folks aren't. Um, and what they're not realizing is that they're hollowing out their code base, they're hollowing out their assets, they're hollowing out their technical capabilities. And so what they might end up seeing down the road, call it like 2-3 years down the line, is that their code base, which used to be an asset, is now a liability because it's breaking all the time. Um, their talent, which used to be an asset, is now just gone because they didn't want to put up with this bull. Um, and they're now experiencing, a lot of problems in terms of deliverability, in terms of servicing their customers, and in terms of creating um, new features because they've eroded the core fundamental assets and advantages that their company had by thoughtlessly implementing AI in a way that was, easy to do, but didn't actually meet their objectives and didn't actually move their company forward. And so I think, there's a good percentage of the market that is going to learn that lesson firsthand, and then cycle out.
And that's business missteps and human nature, and so that's that. But let's go from ease to evil. Have you read the or are you aware of the hit piece on Sam Altman that was recently put out?
I haven't read it because it's long, but I read a little bit of it. What are your thoughts?
I've always said he was kind of an Eddie Haskell, in my opinion. You may be too young to know who that is, but Leave It to Beaver, one of the main characters, Leave It the two sons, and Leave It to Beaver were Wally and Theodore, or the Beaver, and Wally was the older son who had a friend named Eddie Haskell, who was always super polite to Mrs. Cleaver and like acted like the nicest guy, but did a bunch of devious. He was like not the kid you'd want your kid running around with in the background. I've always said I read Sam Altman as a Steve Jobs from the sense of he's good at selling things and he's hard to work for. You could tell that in the whole firing the first time around. Like he's not somebody that's probably easy to work with. And B, he's an Eddie Haskell in the sense that he acts like a sweet little boy next door in front of the camera, but that's obviously not what his incentives are. Is he like inherently evil and worse than anybody else out there? No, not really. I think Dario's better at playing the game than Sam is. And I do think probably Dario has a bit more better moral compass than Sam does, but by a bit, I mean a bit. They're both trying to raise a bunch of money to. That's my
Yeah,
read.
I I think if in all of these cases, um, they're constantly spinning narratives, they're constantly positioning themselves, they're constantly branding themselves, right? Um, and so I think you're pretty safe bet to say, none of these people are who they present themselves to be to the media. Um,
Demis is the one I would stand up for, though. If there is a good guy amongst them, Demis Hassabis is probably him. That's just
well,
me.
I guess the thing that comes to mind for me is like, is he back to this perspective? Like, is he a good guy or is he just like interested in different things,
Yeah, that's probably true.
right? And so this is where I think
He has better interest. He has more
he
humane
has
interest.
he has more like aligned interests, right? Um, and 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 wants to solve like tough science problems, as the thing that captures his attention and interests him. Whereas, I think it's pretty safe to say that Dario and Sam Altman uh, both want to monopolize the LLM and AI concept, right? That's what they're in the business of. They're in the business of creating a monopoly, and there are two monopolies or two would-be monopolies competing, um, with Google in the background, kind of doing its own thing. Um, so I would say, I think uh, I I don't know what we would expect out of someone like Sam or someone like Dario, in the sense that like it's kind of comes to the territory to some degree, of what these folks are and do. I think again, and this is where like I haven't gone super deep on that article. Is there some, you know, what are some highlights?
And he tells everybody what they want to hear, and then does what he wants to do in the background. Is more or less what it's the same thing that was told to the board. The same reason he was let go the first time around was like he's saying one thing and doing another all the time, and he's always telling people what they want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, on some level, that sounds like
Sam.
every. Well,
Does it sound like
every
Satya Nadella? Does it sound like Sundar Pichai? I would argue it doesn't sound like every mega company CEO.
I would agree with you. It doesn't sound like the incumbents that don't need to steal press time, right? That don't need to that don't need to be in front of the hype cycle or don't want to, right? If you're a Google, if you're a Microsoft, if you're a Meta, like you don't want to be in front of the camera. You don't want to attract attention. You've already won. You're entrenched. You are, you're in a gilded mansion. Like you want to be in the news cycle as little as possible, at least in the general news. Because the more you're in the news cycle, the more the politician can leverage people not liking you to boost their attention. And so the more you get used as a mechanism for other people's interests, right? Whereas if you're an OpenAI who's burning, you know, like who's probably burning 3 times the amount of money than they make, which at the amounts of money we're talking about here is insane, 3 or 4 times the amount of money than they make. And I'm just making stuff up. I have no idea. But if you're OpenAI, who like whether they live or whether they survive as a business is derived from their ability to raise money. Their ability to raise money, especially at the scale they've been operating at, is based on their perception, right? Same thing with Anthropic. If that's kind of the situation that you're in, then like the media attention is really important, and then like the branding is really important, and so of course they're going to say,
Let me throw a curveball.
yeah,
Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg is an Altman. He's not Satya Nadella.
um,
He
in
likes
what
to be out
sense?
in front of the press. His very questionable his actions. He's getting sued left and right all the time and denying that he even knew what the hell was going on when there's trails of emails that show that he did know what was going on. Like I do think there is a level of ethics at a top CEO level. You might have to fight a little dirtier when you're not the incumbent, but there are incumbents that are just as willing to fight dirty, and there are incumbents that live with a little bit better, bigger moral compass than their competitors.
I think maybe, and I would say there are top CEOs who really value their brand and perception, being that that is the case, and work very hard to ensure that there is no evidence and that they operate in that way. Um, and I think there are some that care less, right? But also, if you think about Google and you think about there's some differences too. If you think about Google and you think about Microsoft, their CEOs are not founder CEOs. They're not the origins of the company.
Yep.
They are people who climbed a very arduous corporate ladder where they didn't get there playing nice, right? But they got there playing very smart and playing very smart with perception, because that's how you climb a corporate ladder. Whereas you talk about um, Meta, Facebook, you talk about Mark Zuckerberg, he's the founder CEO. He got there by, being right originally and maintaining his advantage and continuing to push hard and push forward. So I think part of those characteristics is also part of the characteristics of like the origin story of those individuals, um, and how they kind of get to where they get, right? Tim Cook, for example, is, from what I understand, not the most pleasant person to work with, but he's he climbed a corporate ladder to get where he is. He's going to be very thoughtful about everything he puts in writing, right? Because the people that don't get picked off like pretty quickly.
That's a great point. All right, let's get to Mythos. What are your thoughts on Mythos? Is it gonna? Did we just create quantum like level decryption that's gonna destroy all
Yeah.
the code bases out there? Because that's kind of what fear
Mm,
mongering
No,
does.
no. Because if we discover quantum, then like nothing is safe, right? Like the concept of security goes out the window. We created a better model that can be much more effective at identifying holes and all of this. And really, its largest advantage is that it doesn't need to sleep. And it's a better use of compute. I think it's fantastic marketing. I think it's incredible marketing, and I think it's incredible sales. Because what are they really doing? They're going to the people who don't care about the cost of things. They're going to the largest providers, the biggest tech companies, but also the largest providers for their flagship product, which is Claude Code. So they're going to their biggest potential prospects. They're saying, we have the most powerful model that has ever existed. And that is so powerful that it changes the equation on how software works, which is, a great pitch. By the way, it's unsafe. Would you like to be in the press helping us making sure it's safe? We'll take on getting the press interested. You just need to sign on and be part of these committees. By the way, do you want a free trial to the most powerful model that's ever existed? Right? It's just a really, really well put together marketing campaign. But it's not a marketing campaign to the public. It's a marketing campaign to those 15 different hyperscalers for them to adopt Claude Code. Because, of course, if the model is 1.5 times better than all the other models, but 6 times more expensive, those people don't care. Not even a little bit, right? So it's just a way, I think it's just a really good marketing tactic to secure the largest tech companies in the world as customers and defaulting to Mythos and doing a little bit of good open source work along the way. And using the open source work as basically a test trial to not just get them involved, but also to be able to do a whole bunch of different testing. Like, okay, how are these large companies using it? Because now all these large companies they're gonna assign like a team or two, right, to work on this stuff. And they'll do that just for the headline. We're working on securing the world from the big bad boogeyman, right? They're like, oh, okay. What they won't do, right? Like what Google won't do is play that line of like, we're the boogeyman, but we're also the jailer of the boogeyman. They're not going to do that. They're not going to play that line. They've got too much at stake. Anthropic's like, we'll dance around lines. We've got, like everything to win and not much to lose. So they're just participating in the same way that, and we've seen this before, actually. We've seen something like this before. When you look at the circular financing stuff that ChatGPT and OpenAI, that Sam did, it's the same idea, right? They're going to the biggest companies and saying, hey, I have this idea on how, we can be in the press, but you'll be in the press. And all you have to do is sign on this non-binding agreement. And then we'll do a press release and it'll be fine because there's no consequences to this. And then Sam can say, and if anything ever goes wrong, you can just throw me under the bus. You can just throw OpenAI under the bus, right? Which is, of course, exactly what has happened. So basically, both Anthropic, both. I mean, to your point earlier of like Sam kind of doing whatever and Dario being very thoughtful about how they play these games, like I think that trend continues. But a lot of them, they're just going to these companies and coming up with very clever marketing ideas. And I just think of this as like a really targeted sales campaign to get bigger accounts with the largest tech companies, which could, take their $25-30 billion. Because now Anthropic's is a front runner on revenue. On ARR, which is not revenue. So now they're the front runner, and so like they could, if this campaign works, right, and the model is better at the 1.5, whatever, like a significant way, and it doesn't need to be 10x better, it just needs to be like twice better, like that's good enough. Then they'll just in one fell swoop get all the biggest customers, and they might double their revenue in like 2 months, 3 months.
Yeah, and I was going to get into, you and I were talking the other day in the car about Meta not putting out any more open source models, and now they have Muse Spark, which is like a 7 billion parameter model, but that's way over the heads of a lot of people that listen to this. So the question I'll leave you with is this check? Because as soon as they did this, OpenAI, Sam came out and said, well, we have something very similar. It's not Spud, but it's very similar. And we're going to be doing, he's racing to say that they have a security breaking model trained on 100% Blackwells, which is great. That's a great sell. No models come out that's all Blackwells, which is for those who don't understand, like the step up from the Nvidia chip that most of this stuff has been running on. So, like, but I almost think, is this check, or is it? Are we going to continue to watch these two play checkers for a while?
I think,
Chess.
um, yeah, I look. I think the one thing that is very clearly true is you can never count Sam out, um, because he is playing the largest, most complicated fundraising cycle startup game that anyone's ever done in the world, and he should have lost and died, forever ago. Like he's like eight like should have it should have like fallen apart already past it. And he seems to always find a way to raise the stakes and have another roll of the dice. um and so I think in general, and this is, I think, where it's there's a big difference between Anthropic and OpenAI, where OpenAI is constantly keeping themselves alive and getting another shot at the big win. And Anthropic is just thoughtfully, methodically building a business that will endure. And so I think the big question on whether there's a checkmate down the road comes down to, does Anthropic make an unforced error along the way? And on the other side, does OpenAI land a magical plane? Right? Because they're basically taking two different approaches to being successful. And so the two like unknowns is like, does OpenAI land some crazy stuff like that no one's expected, and just like the dice roll worked? Um, and on the other side, does Anthropic make a series of unforced errors that like cause them to have issues? And so it's very interesting to see the different business philosophies and business approaches kind of clashing at this scale and at this level.
So what I'm hearing you saying there on that, in my mind's eye, is by land the magic plane is, do they launch something that makes them the new TikTok, like that makes them so consumer embedded that the actual consumer market works and they're able to make money by going B2C. And Anthropic misstepping is, do they win over the business community because Anthropic did something wrong at the enterprise level?
Potentially, it could also be, does the government buy OpenAI?
I thought about that. I thought about it. So there's new law. I mean, Elon's lawsuit has changed, and Elon is not stupid.
No,
Elon all the money that he's suing them for, he's giving to the OpenAI Foundation. He doesn't want any money. He's suing them to stop them from becoming a for-profit, to reverse that decision. If that works, because it is kind of logical if you listen to their mission statements and what, even though Elon argued for going private as well, or going for-profit as well, like, but it's a damn good argument. If that works and they return to to nonprofit status, I could easily see the government, then that becoming the government arm of AI.
potentially, right? Like it's one of those things where like OpenAI is just looking for something like unprecedented, unusual, weird, that just creates a gap that can't be surmounted. And they're just rolling dice looking for that. And they've kind of, I mean, if you look at some of their government deals, the DoD deal, right? Like they're looking for that. They're looking for they're looking for silver bullets. Anthropic is building a business where they're loading a machine gun with a lot of lead bullets, and they're creating a factory for manufacturing lead bullets. And they're just building a thoughtful, straightforward, like, business. And so, now they can always start making mistakes, right? Um, and on the OpenAI side, like they could get a silver bullet. And so I think this is where you like it's a difference of philosophies and strategies. I do think that if you look at the default outcome, meaning like what if the probabilities get played out again and again, Anthropic keeps moving forward at a stable rate, which is also the fastest rate that anyone's ever seen. And at the same time, OpenAI, keeps cycling and cycling and not hitting double sixes. I think that's when I think about like what might make one go which way. That's kind of the thing that I think about. Which also means that OpenAI needs to do more and more unprecedented things in order to survive. And Anthropic just needs to keep executing and capture the market.
So, long story short, Mythos is not the end of the world. We don't all need to be worried about our cybersecurity tomorrow. Just grab your popcorn and keep enjoying the entertainment as these two put on the gloves and continue to get in the ring.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting time to kind of study how these companies are operating and the moves they're making, because it's so in the press. There's a lot more information than there is a lot of the times when these large technology waves come across the U.S.
Wow, great insights. Thanks a lot for joining me today, man. I know you'll be back. I know you and I are working side by side now, so I'm sure this will not be the last time you're on the show. And I really invite people to check out Capacity Overload, because if you want some more pragmatic insights on how to actually leverage AI in a way that is useful to missions and to people, then that's a good show to watch.
Happy to
Thanks,
be
man.
here, Jason. Thanks for having me.